Welcome to the Gig Boss Podcast, where musicians go to learn how to navigate the new music economy. My name's Adam Meckler, and it's my mission to get you the tools to have a thriving career in music. Today, we've got Brian Courage, and we've got Andrew Green, and we're in the same room for the first time in the history of the podcast. I'm in the same room with the people I'm talking to. We're going to talk about these guys and what they do in their careers, and we're going to talk a little bit about tour routing. We're going to talk about booking gigs and tour routing. We are a band, too. We've been on the road the last few days. We're a band called Supercell. Brian booked our tour, so we can talk a little bit about that process, and you've done that for other people, too, which we'll talk about. And that's basically it. So we should just start talking. Each of you, I'd like to hear just kind of like a snapshot of what you guys do, and you don't have to talk about all the way back to like how you grew up and stuff, but maybe give me like a snapshot of your careers up to this point. Andrew, why don't you start?
Well, I am a drummer and I suppose a percussionist as well, but I've kind of grown to embrace the moniker of drummer more than percussionist.
Yeah.
Even though I have a classical percussion degree from Lawrence University.
Was it classical and jazz studies, or just classical percussion?
Wow. No, I did not know that I could do jazz studies not on the vibraphone.
Ah.
It was not made clear.
Interesting.
Until it was a little too late.
Are you salty about that?
Maybe a little bit, but not particularly, because I feel like I would not be doing anything different if I had a wonderful piece of paper that gave me credentials to get into jam sessions with a jazz studies degree.
Right.
You know, like it doesn't matter.
The paper literally means nothing.
I did as much jazz as I possibly could at Lawrence, and I feel like I gleaned as much information as I could from studying all of that. You know, I don't know that a jazz studies thing would have aided me much more than what I've already done.
Yeah. So what do you do now?
Well, I just play freelance. I do a lot of jobbing gigs, and I have a weekly gig downtown at a restaurant with a regular trio and various freelance groups. I'd say my main creative project is this band called Twin Talk with Dustin Lorenzi and Katie Ernst.
Yeah, and we had Katie on the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what it was, episode 5 or 6.
Mm-hmm. She said she had a great time.
It was fun.
And I play in various rock projects, and I guess the most recent one of those would be with this vocalist Bethany Thomas, who's a killer, and the rest of that band is just, it's all monsters. They're all so good, and I feel very lucky to be amongst them. I also play for this crazy show called the Fly Honey Show, which is a burlesque variety show. And the most recent iteration was 3 nights at Talia Hall, the last of which was sold out. So 1,000 people in that room.
Wow.
It was the most epic show I've ever played.
Cool.
And yeah, it kind of changed my life.
Nice. That's awesome. And you're based in Chicago.
I am based here.
Which is where we are now.
And in addition to playing, I teach a little bit. It's not a ton, but it's enough to, you know, have a little bit extra every month. And then I repair and modify cymbals as well as make jewelry out of cymbals.
Cool.
In my garage workshop.
So when did repairing cymbals turn into making jewelry out of cymbals? Was that, you were always like an artist in that way, or is that a recent development?
Well, I think that I have one of those brains that needs to be doing something I don't know how to do. I need to have a project where I can kind of fixate or focus on learning how to do something. And I have to kind of blunder my way through that, whether it's watching YouTube videos or just making it up as I go, or just, you know, throwing money at buying tools and then figuring out which ones work. And so the cymbal repair thing started at Lawrence when my professor, Dane, asked me, hey, can we do anything about all these cracked cymbals that we have? And I just like looked up on a forum how to do it, and someone had made a little tutorial, and I was like, yeah, I could do that. You just have to buy a Dremel. Okay, cool. I could figure that out. And then I think that was 15 or 16 years ago.
Wow.
So I've been doing that, and the novelty aspect for cymbal repair is that every cymbal is different. So there needs to be a little bit different approach, and it's all individual to whatever problem that cymbal has. And so I get to problem solve. I get to, fulfill that novelty there. And the cymbal jewelry thing happened maybe 3 or 4 years ago when my sister asked for a Deathly Hallows cymbal, like laser cut out of wood off of Etsy for Christmas as like a Christmas ornament.
Interesting.
And I looked it up, and it was $12, and shipping to get it there by Christmas was $26. And I was not willing to pay over double for shipping for a piece of laser cut wood.
Yep.
And so I just went, well, I could just make that. And so I made her a Christmas ornament with that cymbal, and, cutting it out using the tools that I had was challenging because I hadn't done things like that. I hadn't made sharp corners before, because the whole point of repair is these elegant
Smooth
curves.
things out, yeah.
So I kind of blundered my way through it, and it worked out pretty nicely.
Cool.
And then, friends have earrings, and they have different shapes, and those shapes are made out of plate metal, and they seemed like something that I could easily make out of a cymbal and have it be much more significant, have a backstory, have significance with the material that it came from, in addition to its current form.
Yeah, and it's personal to you because you're a drummer.
Mm-hmm.
You use cymbals all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm always fascinated by businesses that arise out of that sort of necessity to be like, I'm not going to pay for this thing. I'm just going to do it myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I could probably do it better or differently. Something that's more unique to me. That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
Brian Courage, bass man.
Bass man.
Tell me a bit about yourself, man. Give me your 2-minute pitch.
Was born at a very young age. And then from there, born in New York, grew up out there, went to college with you lovely individuals.
Indeed.
Sort of. Adam and I didn't overlap, but we met shortly after he graduated.
Yep.
And then I followed him out to Minneapolis, lived there for a couple of years, then moved back to New York, back to Brooklyn for 4 years, and now I've been in Chicago for 4 years. Along the way, I have, as much as I can, just tried to make a living from playing bass.
Mm-hmm.
Only place where that was not possible was in New York, because nobody can just play in New York until you get to a point where you're so famous that things are a little different for you anyway. So I was working as a booking agent living in Brooklyn, mostly just for other individual musicians and groups rather than working for a venue or a label or an agency.
Yeah.
I was one of the few guys out there who was doing that freelance and completely independent. And now I'm in Chicago and playing a lot more out here than I was in New York, and very happy to be in a city where that's possible.
Mm-hmm.
And just trying to be open to playing as many different kinds of music as I can. I mean, my background is primarily as a jazz player, starting from college. I did play a lot of classical music through high school and college, starting to get called to do some more of that recently, which has been really cool to get back into that world. And I would love to do more of that kind of stuff. I just haven't been getting those calls for a long time. But yeah, mostly working in the jazz world and improvised music of all shapes and sizes. I have the main creative outlet of the kind of the pandemic and post-pandemic era has been a band called Abhorrent Expanse, which is a fully improvised metal band with myself and one other guitarist who lives in Chicago, and then two of our friends from Minneapolis. So just navigating that and trying to make things work with a band in multiple cities.
Yeah, that's tough.
Presents its own challenges. But we put out a record this spring that I'm super proud of, and that got some really nice reviews. And it just kind of occupies a niche that not a lot of people are getting involved with. There's not
improvised metal.
Improvised metal.
Yeah.
It's not like there is a scene in New York of some bands who are still writing riffs and operating in a more traditional way, but then incorporate improvised elements into otherwise through composed metal bands. And so there's improvised parts that get real weird, but people are willing to put up with it because they know something composed is coming after that, that they can bang their head to.
But there's no payoff of the Abhorrent Expanse.
No. It's
no head-banging payoff.
It's just
relentless.
Or you could think of the whole thing as payoff.
The whole thing is payoff.
Let's recommend that plan.
So, the metal thing is not. It didn't just come out of the blue for you. You like love that music, and you've played that music on electric, right?
Yeah.
You're playing electric in that band, I assume.
Primarily, there's some upright stuff, but all the live stuff is all electric. And I got into metal before I got into jazz. I got involved in that more seriously in high school and didn't really start playing jazz and taking that seriously, really starting to learn about it until college. I had played in a big band in high school, but that was all just reading walking lines off a page. I didn't know how to walk a bass line on my own. And I was taking classical bass lessons from an incredible jazz bassist from Ike Sturm, who's Fred Sturm's son. Fred was our jazz director at Lawrence.
Rest in peace.
Yeah, incredible. And Ike is an amazing jazz bassist and composer, but I wasn't really involved in that at that point. So I was mostly working on classical music with him. Of course, he was feeding me records. He was giving me Dave Holland stuff and Avishai Cohen and all these amazing jazz bass players, and I could appreciate it superficially, but I had no concept of what was going on or how the band was doing what they were doing.
Yeah.
So in retrospect, there's certainly things that I wish we had worked on at that time in the jazz world, but
getting your ears around music is such a huge part of eventually understanding how to play it, right?
Yeah.
It's like just getting your ears on it is like a huge step.
Yeah.
Especially in the high school when there's so much popular culture and things coming your way where you're like, I should be listening to things that make me cool. It's like, it's like you had things that were like jazz records. You were listening to that stuff.
As the kid in orchestra who was listening to metal records at home by himself, I wasn't really terribly concerned with being cool.
Yeah.
But
so for those of you that are metalheads that are listening, we will link Abhorrent Expanse's record in the show notes, and we'll link the Twin Talk stuff in the show notes as well. This band, Supercell, will have a record coming out December 2nd. So if you're interested in that, Supercell Band is on Instagram. You can find that. I'll link that in the show notes as well.
I think one of the ways that Brian and I hilariously connect, because there are countless ways, is that I kind of started off playing metal as well.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. And that's a very choppy, like chopsy kind of. You have to be able to really play.
Brian was much more hardcore. I was more into the thrash and then pop metal, and then I kind of transitioned out in high school and switched to more improvised bass music at a slightly lower decibel level.
Yeah, cool.
But Metallica and Iron Maiden have a special place in my heart, and they did in a car ride recently when we were reminiscing about a lot of that stuff. And Brian put on a Man-O-War track that was pretty killing.
And the bartender at the club last night at Bar Central, he was a metalhead. So he saw your T-shirt and he was like, dude.
Regardless of what kind of band I'm playing with, I always am the one who gets along super well with the sound guy, because the majority of sound guys are all metalheads.
Interesting.
And
Tucker's like that. Okay.
Yeah, of course. Tucker, like, not only a sound guy, Tucker's an incredible engineer.
Yeah, signature tone recording in Minneapolis.
Adam has worked with a bunch on different projects, but Tucker has mixed, mastered, recorded some of my favorite metal records of the past decade. And he's, as far as I'm concerned, he's one of the most, just one of the best metal engineers in the U.S. working
Wow.
today. He's working
No
with
shit.
all kinds of incredible
I didn't realize
bands.
he was that. I mean, like I knew he was deep in that and that everyone was coming to him for that. But when I was talking to him, because I was doing jazz stuff, he was like, I want to do more jazz stuff, man. Send people to me, you know?
Yeah.
But he's another example of somebody who also plays jazz bass and does metal stuff on electric. That's interesting.
Yeah. And as soon as I pitched the Abhorrent Expanse project to him, it just, tell me when this is happening. I will cancel everything. We're going to do this. We absolutely could not have done that with any other engineer. We threw so much weird shit at him.
That's cool. Very cool. So neither of you, I said this the other day, and you, I don't know, it's like it could be taken a couple different ways. Neither of you have held a real job, like a job, since graduating from college. I think that's super inspiring. I love that about you guys. And I want to talk about I want to maybe dig a little deeper into the things that you do that were non-playing. So both of you have become top call players in the city where you're at in Chicago. And I'd love to talk a little more about being in New York too, but we can maybe come back to that. I want to talk about the things you did on the side that were music industry related, that are music industry related or art related, that made you extra income or continue to make you extra income. So like Brian, let's talk a little bit about your booking stuff.
Yep.
Like when you were in New York, and maybe this can cross into just being in New York and trying to survive, but you said you freelance booked for a lot of artists. Mm-hmm. So what did those things look like? Like when you booked a tour for someone, first, like how would you get a gig like that? And then what kind of things would you ask from the artist in order to be able to do your job in a way that was effective?
Yeah. So the booking agent thing came about through a conversation with John Raymond.
Yeah, who was just on the podcast a couple weeks ago.
Who's teaches in Indiana, but he's from Minnesota originally. And I was living in Minneapolis after college, and John was coming back to town to play gigs, as a lot of people do in New York. They go back to where they're from or have lived previously to hustle up a bunch of gigs around there. Yep. Because this was certainly my experience. It was way easier for me to get gigs that paid well outside of New York when I was living there. So I would go up to Minnesota a couple times a year for 2 weeks at a time because it was just easier to generate work up there.
Right.
And I would try to play at least one gig in Chicago, either on the way up or on the way back every time. The vast majority of those being with Andrew. And I met a ton of the local players here doing that, even though I wasn't living here. I hadn't lived here. It's just had other guys join our groups, or we were splitting bills with other bands. So by the time I moved here, I already knew a lot of the other musicians.
Yeah.
But the booking agent thing started with a conversation with John, and he had been helping me out as I moved back to New York. He was the one who got me hooked up with my first apartment. He was just trying to keep an eye out for me as I was getting started. That's on awesome. The scene. So he knew I was looking for other kinds of work and didn't have a lot of gigs yet. He and his wife had just had, I believe, their second kid. And he had this band, still has the band called Real Feels, with Gilad Hexelman on guitar and Colin Stranahan on drums. Yep. And he wanted to be on the road more with that band, but he had a newborn and did not have time to be booking any of this stuff for himself.
Right.
So we were talking. Yeah. Adam knows exactly how that goes.
I know that game.
We were talking, and he said, man, I would love some help with booking some of these tours, and I don't have time to do it myself. So would you be willing to step in and do some of that? So we had to figure out a way to make that worthwhile for him, but also consistent and lucrative for me. Because majority of other booking agents all work on commission. They book a gig, the artist gets paid a certain amount, the agent will take a 15 or 20% cut. And
Right.
that works great if you have a stable of 10 or 12 different artists that you're working with, because there's always multiple irons in the fire. You don't have to worry about when that commission payment is going to land because you're trying to line up something for all these other people. But John, this was a new thing for me, and John was my only artist. So I said, okay, well, I can't do a commission-based system because I need this to be reliable income.
Mm-hmm.
So he was willing to let me charge him hourly based on the amount of time that I put in the process of book. And I think that just required a lot of trust on his part that I wasn't going to be unnecessarily charging him for time that wasn't actually spent doing that. Like, he trusted that however much time I said I put in was actually what the work was.
Yeah.
But that way I knew that in, like, similar to a more traditional job, you work a certain number of hours, you get paid a certain amount.
Yep.
So I could rely on that. Yeah, I didn't want to, it's an interesting balance point. I didn't want to work too much and overcharge him.
Yeah.
But I also needed to work enough that I could actually get him some gigs and succeed in the thing that I was trying to do.
Totally.
So the only thing that worked was 80-hour work weeks.
Yeah, so it was only fair that I'm charging him a couple grand a week to pull that all up.
And he was a jazz trumpet player in New York, so I'm sure he wasn't paying that.
Yeah, he was. Ironically, he was still very involved in booking the gigs, and the majority of what I was doing for him was booking clinics and master classes.
Oh, yeah. And there's more money in that.
Yeah, which is how his band was able to break even and make sure his sidemen got paid well on the road, is that every city they went to, they tried to play a clinic that day.
Yeah, so this is a formula for booking tours that's maybe interesting to some listeners, where we tend to call them like anchor gigs, where you get one gig that pays a bunch of money and then it kind of helps so you can supplement the club shows. And especially when you're dealing with like improvised music, or you're dealing with non-traditional music where you don't have a huge audience that you've developed. Maybe you're early on in your touring process, but you have a lot of experience as an educator, or you have a lot of experience as a player. There's value in the education system. And like, I run a jazz program at Michigan Technological University, and I'm always kind of reaching out to artists and going like, come on into my school, or at least for the last couple of years, it's been like, zoom in and talk to my students and I can pay you a few $100s. It's like, schools have budgets to do that. So if you're somebody who's looking to book a tour and you're looking for anchor gigs, and you're somebody who's maybe has some charisma, is the ability to teach, the ability to really communicate about your music and what you do, then you can reach out to universities, you can reach out to high schools, and you can book gigs that pay a significant amount of money and help to anchor, which is sort of what you're talking about.
Yep.
And I think we all have experienced clinicians coming into various schools that we attended. I think Lawrence was a great example of this, where our professors would bring in people, not only, top level pinnacle artists who were coming in for the guest series, but, more up and coming people, more people like closer to our age, or our, like what we saw ourselves doing, and listening to their experiences and getting advice from them. And, like I could go down the list of all the people that I got to work with at Lawrence, and like the first two that come to mind are like Dave King and Nate Smith.
Yep.
That was like, freshman and sophomore year.
Man, Nate Smith didn't come when I was a student. No, but I did get to work with Dave. That was killer. I have a very distinct memory of working with Dave at Lawrence. It was really impactful, and just seeing Happy Apple there a lot. And
developing that relationship came about because he came in for the clinic. Like that was the first time I met him.
Right.
And then, we ended up both booking Happy Apple or the trucking company at some point
Yep.
to come through.
That was ironically my first artist booking experience, was bringing in our friend Reed Flicht, was previously involved with getting Dave to Lawrence, and it became an annual tradition.
And that was like a student fund, right? Wasn't
Yep.
that like a student fund that where you could bring bands in or whatever, bring entertainment into the school?
Yeah, I was working with multiple different student organizations because it used to be just one group, and then they no longer were able to fund the whole thing anymore, so I had to reach out to different organizations. Also, just I'm going to say writing grants, but it's a lot less involved. A very, very basic version of writing a grant to another like student fund.
Yeah, okay.
That it wasn't immediate. It's like, oh, there's actually this money that is accessible, but you have to do this, this, and this to get to that. So I brought in Happy Apple. I brought in Todd Clauser's group, which Adam was playing in.
That was when I was playing. Yeah, we played in the Memorial Union when it was like brand new or something. Yeah.
I booked that gig.
That was this is crazy. I remember this weekend because it was before Easter. Do you remember that? It was before Easter.
Yep.
And so we played the Saturday night before Easter, and we drove back to Minneapolis after the gig. And so we got back to Minneapolis at like 3 a.m. or something, 4 a.m. And I was like trying to stay awake because Todd was driving, and it was like, got to stay awake in the front seat. And then I got back to my apartment in St. Paul and set my alarm and fell asleep, and then did not wake up to the alarm. And so I woke up to a phone call from Kate DeVoe, who's a really amazing trumpet player in Minneapolis, who she and I played this Easter gig every year, which is like Easter for brass players is like, it's time to make some money. It's like, you can really make some money.
That's my one classical gig every year.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, so it's like classical. I'm playing piccolo trumpet. I'm like learning, and we're just like slamming super hard in the Memorial Union the night before. So my chops are like all swollen, and I'm like super fatigued. And I get a phone call at 8 a.m. and it's Kate, and she's like, "Hey, are you on your way? Are you coming to the gig?" It's like the only time I ever slept through a gig alarm, and I got that. She goes, "It's okay. I told them that you had a Catholic church gig," because a lot of trumpet players will do like an early, more like 5 a.m. Catholic church gig and then rush to another, like a Lutheran service. This was a Methodist church. So she's like, "I told them that you had a Catholic church gig beforehand." Totally covered for me. It was great. Yeah, it was good stuff.
Yeah. So that tangent, just to say, we've all had the clinician experience as students. And so I think we all know how valuable it can be to work with students.
What's your experience been like with Twin Talk? I was going to ask that about doing clinic work.
The Twin Talk clinics have been some of the most rewarding moments that we've had together as a band. Even outside of performing, and like we are a very well-rehearsed band.
Yep.
Especially before the pandemic, we probably averaged out to rehearsing once every week or two for 7 years.
Wow.
Because leading up to a tour, we would have a lot of rehearsals,
right?
And then we'd have a little bit of time off, but we kind of had like monthly or every 2-month gigs in Chicago for that whole period of time. And I figured it out at one point just looking through the calendar, but I would imagine we're at over 150 or 175, maybe even 200 gigs with that band.
That's awesome.
And with as much as we've rehearsed and performed, the things that Dustin and Katie would say after students played, like, have changed my life.
Oh,
and
that's beautiful, man. You're learning from the members of your band.
Yeah. And sometimes you need that impetus of a student struggling through something or trying to figure out what to do. And then Dustin just comes in with this gem, or Katie, lays down a foundation for, especially, female students to look up to her. And she presents herself in a way where she's very powerful on stage.
Yep.
And she talks about that a lot. Where you kind of have to put up this facade to be a powerful performer, and that's expected in the industry.
Like acting, kind of.
Yeah,
you mean?
kind of.
Even if you're like inside, you're like, am I supposed to be here? Am I worth? It's like you gotta just put it on.
I think it's so valuable for her to kind of like lift the veil a little bit, and say like, yeah, no, in that moment I had no idea what we were doing. You know, if we played before the students, before the clinic, like right at the top of the clinic, and he's like, yeah, we didn't know what we were going to do right there, and you know, lifting that veil or lifting that curtain allows the students to see like, oh, we can appear this way and still be vulnerable or still not know what's going on.
Yeah.
And
I mean, representation is so important.
Exactly.
In the music, because it's like when you go do a clinic at a college, it's like students need to see themselves in. I was just mentioning this the other day to you guys, maybe, I don't remember, but I had a student who said like, he was like, man, I've never had a young black student of mine who had went to St. Paul Conservatory and then went to McNally Smith and studied trumpet with me. And he said, I said this on the podcast, actually, talking to Aaron Washington, but he goes, I've never had a teacher that looks like me, you know? And I was like, geez, it's incredible that he's lasted this long in the system when he can't see himself in the music. I mean, it's like, we have no trouble with that. It's like white dudes everywhere, right? But it's like, man, it's like being able to see yourself, and particularly women, it's like, you don't see a lot of women in jazz bands when you get into the college level. It's like, I do a lot of guest artist gigs at high schools where I go and they play my music and we do a big concert, and it's like 75% of every band are female students or female identifying students. And it's like, why is there such a huge drop off when you get to the college level? Like maybe they don't see themselves in the bands that are playing professionally, and that's why there's no desire to continue playing. They're like, oh, there's no future for me in this. And Katie's such a badass player. I mean, it's like a singer as well. And I think in the industry, there are these ideas about what singers are, you know, amongst instrumentalists. And to have somebody who's such a badass player also be singing and doing it at the same time. And we talked about this on Katie's episode of the podcast a lot, of like the independence of doing what she does on bass and doing what she does singing. It's incredible.
And her ability to kind of split her brain and, you know, play bass, kind of like her bass playing is kind of like accompanying me, and then her singing is kind of, you know,
it's like another horn.
Yeah. So she's interacting with both of us and improvising with both functions. And obviously, well, I guess not obviously, but I don't think she thinks of them as separate things. They're connected. The interconnectivity of it, the interdependence rather than independence. Yeah. Because they rely on each other to be able to make something happen. But it still appears as though she's splitting her brain.
Right.
To be able to improvise freely with both of us.
I mean, she said she goes, this is no big deal. I don't know. I can just do it. And I was like, cool. That's
great.
That's great.
Awesome. Super.
It's fun to hear you say. Like, I can tell that it feels that way to you. Like, listening to you, I can tell that it's free flowing. You know, it's like, here it is and here it is. And it's pretty amazing. I wanted to go back to your time in New York, because we kind of went on a tangent with anchor gigs, which is a really important part of booking a tour. So you started with John. Did it grow from there? Did you start working for other artists and booking for other artists?
Yep. I worked with John for, I think, between 1.5 to 2 years. And I just started telling people that I was doing that. And John would talk about it to other folks as well. And so it got on the radar. One of the next artists I worked with was my former teacher, Ike Sturm.
Oh, cool.
So his project, Endless Field, is a duo with a really amazing guitarist named Jesse Lewis. And I started working with them, same thing, like booking them in different parts of the country than where they had usually played before, and trying to get them some clinics. It was interesting with them too, because they weren't really pitching themselves as a jazz group, because it's still instrumental music, but it was coming from more of a holistic, almost new age kind of space where they're just trying to provide experiences for people without being so tied down to swing rhythms and the type of harmonic and melodic language that you usually would expect from a jazz group.
Right. So how does that change how you book them?
Your pitch is different.
Yeah.
The way you're selling the band is different and also they were deliberately pushing me to not book them at jazz clubs and find other kinds of venues. And sometimes that worked really well, and sometimes that really didn't. And I ended up with them at a coffee shop somewhere in New Hampshire that they said was just really not great. so but it was that kind of feedback.
You can cross that venue off a list.
Don't bring them back to this place. But each group that I started with John, started working with Endless Field, eventually worked with Ryan Keberly, who's a trombonist who's played in Maria Schneider's orchestra. It's a really incredible player. And then from there, right as I trying to think if I missed anybody. I had a couple other potential clients that didn't work out.
You were approached by a record label, weren't you?
Yeah. I was talking with Fabian Almazan about being the in-house booking agent for Biophilia Records, which is the label that Endless Field was signed to and still are signed to. But yeah, Fabian was a friend, and I had seen him play a bunch of times, and he was growing his label and in a similar position to where John had been, not with having a kid specifically at that point, but the responsibilities were outgrowing the amount of time that he had and what he was capable of doing, especially given that he's one of the most acclaimed pianists in the world and is a first call for artists all over the place. So he just didn't have the time to...
He needed to scale. Yeah, that's what we say in the tech world.
Yeah.
Tech startup world. He needed to scale his business.
Mr. Fancy Big Gig Boss Tech Man. But his issue was that he needed the help, but didn't have the resources to pay me to do that.
Right.
So I'm not sure if they eventually ended up hiring another booking person, but that the label's doing great.
There you go. That's good.
Yeah.
That's good to hear.
So I wasn't working with them, but worked with John, Endless Field, Ryan, and then right before I left New York, I very briefly started working with Aaron Goldberg with his trio, with Leon Parker and Matt Penman.
Nice.
And he just was between managers at that point. He was looking for new management and was trying out some different folks and just needed some help with US-based booking specifically. Already was working with some big agency for Europe and Japan, but had a new trio record coming out, wanted some help booking some more stuff in the US. I only ended up working with him for a very short amount of time, 2 or 3 months or something. That was as I was leaving New York. I was getting really burned out with everything I was trying to do there. And so it was all just kind of crumbling apart in different places. And it was, I just couldn't maintain.
So why, this is the question I have. Why, I think I know the answer, but why move to New York then? If you can't make a living playing and you have to do something else.
Yep.
And maybe it's something you don't want to do. I know a lot of people that work at coffee shops, work at Starbucks so they can get benefits and then they play. So what's the benefit of moving to New York, especially as a jazz musician? What's the benefit?
In the jazz education system, even if they don't say it explicitly, there is an understanding that if you want to be the best player you can and be surrounded by the best players that you can, you have to be in New York. Mm-hmm. Whether or not that's actually true, up for debate, but that's the narrative that's presented to you. Is that's where everything's happening. You have to go there.
It's the center.
Yeah.
Do you think it's easier to get album reviews if you're a New York artist versus an artist in Minneapolis or Denver or some other place? Chicago even?
I think in the YouTube and more interconnected global era, calling yourself a New York artist means something different, and also is a lot easier to just generate this image that you're affiliated with that place. Like this is something I know Adam and I and Andrew and I have discussed before. It's something that bothers me is musicians who lived in New York for a very short amount of time and then left, who refer to themselves as New York-based artists 10 years after they've moved to the other side of the country. It's it's like a buzzword in your bio that makes people treat you differently, even if your actual connection to that city is so limited.
Yep.
Which is why I was barely even calling myself a New York-based player when I was living there, and because I wasn't active in the scene. You
were doing jam sessions with a lot of people.
Yeah, I was playing privately with a bunch of my heroes, but that didn't translate to any of them calling me for gigs. I had some gigs with another friend of ours from college who's a trombonist named Chris Misch-Blocksdorf, who was at grad school at NYU, and he started a 10-piece group, and we would play about once a month around different venues in Brooklyn.
Cool.
It was mostly other NYU grad students.
Which means you're paying $20 or something?
Yeah, and $25 on a gig, and most of that's coming out of Chris's pocket.
Right.
There was no, especially for a band of that size,
10-piece.
We couldn't even fit on the stage at a bunch of the places we were playing.
Yeah.
So I was playing those kind of gigs, and then eventually joined a rock band and went on the road with them.
That's right.
I
forgot about
super
that.
hardcore for a year. We played 160 shows in a year. We spent 5 weeks in Europe. We were touring all over the U.S. But that then prohibited me from doing the booking agent work while I was on tour. You wouldn't always have access to internet. I wasn't bringing my computer with me on those tours.
Yeah.
The Europe stuff, you're in totally different time zones. You can't, so much of booking is about getting emails in front of people at a time when they'll actually read it.
Yeah.
You have to be so meticulous about the time of day when you're, and the part of the week when you're sending specific stuff out.
So let's really quick break that down.
I'm jumping all over the place.
What are the most effective times to send an email? When do people look at emails? What's the formula there?
For me, the most effective way to get people to read your emails is if you're booking for Aaron Goldberg. Compared to the other artists, just the amount of time difference from how quickly people responded when you're working for an artist who has a high profile art, like Aaron was sideman for Joshua Redman and Kurt Rosenwinkel,
right? And
also an established band leader in his own right, a bunch of great trio records.
Yeah.
So people just pay a lot more attention when it's someone whose name they're familiar with, and they know that person's going to draw. They're going to bring in a bigger audience. So it's like, cool, I want to book that guy. I'm going to give him precedence over this artist who doesn't already have a base in this part of the country. Even like someone like John was established in New York, but he was doing more stuff on the West Coast.
Yeah.
And at least at the time I was booking for him, he hadn't been out there that much yet. So he didn't have that kind of clout. Even if the guys in his band did, like Gilad, Hexaman, and Colin were more established. And now all three of them have been out there a bunch of times, and John is starting to draw better on his own because he put in the work on those gigs that we booked together, and now he has a much better foothold out there.
Yeah, so we call those eat shit tours. Eat shit tours. The tours where you're building up an audience You're finding a new spots to play.
Yeah. So clinics, anchor gigs are how you afford to do those kind of tours.
Yeah.
Still pay your sidemen, make them want to build a band with you and come
Right.
back and do those again. But booking wise, for me, what seemed to be the most effective was sending emails out Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday in the after lunch but before the end of the business day window. So somewhere in the like 1 to 4 range in the time zone of the person who's receiving the email.
Jeez. So you had it down. You like really were proactive about or meticulous about sending.
Yeah, I mean,
those windows.
It's hard to apply a formula to everybody because everybody's circumstance is different. But overall, that was what seemed to be the most effective. The harder part to figure out, especially in the clinic world, is that you're dealing with academic budgets, which at each school are decided at a certain time of the year. And that ranges wildly across the calendar year, depending on the different schools.
Oh, yeah.
So one school is booking exactly a year in advance. One's booking 9 months in advance. One's booking 6 months in advance. And you're trying to get spots in all 3 of those for the same tour that you're booking 3 months in advance.
We're choosing themes for concerts 3 years in advance at Michigan Tech.
Yeah.
Like, what the hell? I can't think 3 years in advance. Sorry.
And certain places have budgets for clinicians, and you can use those budgets. But if you're approaching the end of the year, some places have discretionary funds that they can apply to new equipment or it's like stuff that they need to buy or provide for their students or stuff like that.
Fix,
and sometimes they don't use all of that money. And so then at the end of the year, and I think we've benefited from that with Twin Talk a couple times where it's like, oh no, we have an extra 300 or 500 like left, sure we can work you guys in.
Yeah. And as a 3-piece band, you get an extra $500 on a tour. I mean, that's great.
That's half the rental.
Yeah.
Rental car.
Half the rental car. Yeah, rental car, man. We were just talking about that.
Don't use your own cars on tour.
Yeah, rentals. That's big, and it's expensive though. So it's like that's why you got to get those anchor gigs. I want to talk a little bit about your cymbal repair business. You said you started at Lawrence, and you probably got some. I mean, like man, I'm forgetting his name. Malcolm Gladwell in his book that I just read called something talks about 10,000 hours, right? So you probably got your 10,000 hours. Why can't I remember the name of his book? Doesn't matter. You got you cut your teeth at Lawrence fixing cymbals for the school, for the program, for Dane. Maybe you're just like, I'll just use this time I'll just do it. Because I'm not expecting to get paid. So
I actually was getting paid because I was the percussion studio assistant.
Oh, nice.
Which had some other names that I won't say.
Yeah, I can imagine what those names might be. So how did your business grow? Like, how did you was it straight up word of mouth, or was it like did you do any advertising? Did you tell people that you had a cymbal repair business? Like, how does that work?
I did the cymbal repairing at Lawrence for the studio and studio instruments. And then some other students had cymbals that had been cracked as well. And so I started repairing those. So I would say while at Lawrence, I probably repaired between 30 and 50 cymbals, maybe total. And a lot of that was just experimentation. And for a lot of the studio cymbals, it was like, it wasn't, hey, fix this. It was, hey, can this cymbal be saved?
Right.
Because there's not really a precedent for repairing cymbals in most places. There aren't that many people who do it, especially who do it regularly. Like some people will have the tools to do it and their crash will crack and then they'll do a terrible job because they don't know how to do it.
Right.
And they don't seek out.
And cymbals aren't cheap.
They are not cheap. And so, if a new ride cymbal is $400 or $500 and, you have an inch long crack on the edge, and there's a guy who can fix it for, like, let's say under $50, that is worth it, especially if it's an instrument that you care about, or you're emotionally attached to, or if it's a significant instrument from history, or you just love it.
Just love the sound of it.
That's something for drummers, especially. We get very attached to our cymbals, because that's the clearest voice, especially for jazz drummers. It's the clearest individual voice. You can kind of get away with playing any drum set within reason, especially if you have your snare, your cymbals, and your kick pedal. You can kind of make any drum set work.
Is the kick pedal about the motion more than the actual head of it, or is it both of those things?
It's about the feel.
The feel of it.
The size of the pedal, the way the mechanism works, because some are chain drive, some are strap driven.
Right.
Every brand has a different feel and a different balance. The beater is different. So sometimes if I can't tour with an actual whole bass drum pedal, I'll just bring a couple of beaters. One's heavier. You can bring a weight to move it around the shaft of the beater so that you can kind of change the action. But on so many house kits, the kick pedal is like, that's the stick for your foot to translate energy into a note.
Yeah.
And so if you go to play that note and it's not where you want it to be, or it doesn't feel how you want it to feel, that's a huge barrier.
Yeah.
And you get used to playing lots of different ones, and certainly some are better than others, but there's kind of a middle ground where, you're splitting a bill with another drummer. They have their kick pedal. It's probably going to be fine. But if it's a house kick pedal, it just gets trashed.
Right.
Always. And they're mechanical objects. They require maintenance. They require, various like lube, and screws can get stripped and parts wear out, bearings wear out. If dirt gets in a bearing, it's toast.
Yeah.
Various things like that. So I would say, in addition to the cymbal repair, just kind of drum maintenance has also been another major aspect of things.
Yeah.
But in terms of how I grew that business, it was completely without effort.
Wow.
I'm not great at posting online. I have an Instagram page that I reluctantly started because it felt like I just had to.
Sure.
But I think with the novelty aspect of it, I don't want to be repairing every single metal drummer's crash cymbals in town. And I think that is an easy avenue where I would have to turn people down.
Yeah.
And that's a good place to be. But also I think like a lot of freelance musicians and artists, we're bad at saying no to things.
Yes, we are.
And so I overcommit myself. And so I kind of, I think, use that as an excuse to justify not like the lack of effort that I put into it. But I also really like the word of mouth thing, because the people who I do these repairs for, they play the instruments out in the world, and other people see those and they go, "Hey, what happened?" And then the story gets told about this person in Chicago who can repair the thing. And then, it's just,
so quality of work is all the advertisement,
the most
you need.
important thing. Yeah. And I'd say that the two
as a player, it's
most high profile cymbals I've worked on or I guess cymbals that have traveled the most, are one of Quinn Kirshner's rides, Bosphorus 21-inch Masters, that's beautiful. And then one of Dave King's rides.
Cool.
That was absolutely about to crack in half.
Wow.
And I kind of convinced, let's say convinced rather than begged him to let me try to fix it. And, put bolts all through the bell to try to like clamp it back together. And somehow it's still alive. It's a complete anomaly. It makes zero sense because he beats the shit out of it at these gigs.
Yeah.
And it's in so many videos. I can hear it on records.
Wow. Cool.
It's pretty outstanding. to be able to like work on these instruments. And then I played for a singer-songwriter project a few months ago, and they sent me the songs to learn, and I'm like transcribing what the drummer was playing. I'm like, man, this really sounds familiar. Is this Quinn on drums? And of course it was.
You recognize the sound of the cymbal.
I recognized that cymbal.
Wow.
Because certain ones stand out, and that one is definitely one that stands out.
That's cool. That's really cool.
So it's just been word of mouth, and I try to when I split shows with other drummers, I try to say, hey, if you're coming through Chicago and you have a cracked cymbal, hit me up. Or
yeah,
like we both live in Chicago, and they see some of the repairs that I have on cymbals that I have, and they're like, hey, who did that? I'm like, me, baby.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm like, oh man, could you? I was like, yeah, and I'll send them an estimate if they send me photos.
Yep.
I can generally send them an estimate of how much it'll be.
Cool.
But I kind of find it a little bit ironic that in the 15 or 16 years I've been repairing cymbals, I don't know that I've ever really cracked a cymbal on a gig.
Yourself?
Yeah, like I don't remember ever playing a cymbal and cracking it while playing it. I've had cymbals that have cracked, but I didn't notice.
Yep. I've been down in New Orleans, man. They hit those things with screwdrivers.
Oh yeah, and I have a screwdriver cymbal, and it's like mushrooming up on the edge. But
they look like flowers almost, because it's like ruts where they hit them.
And I've just, that cymbal I've given up as just like, that's the brass band cymbal.
Yeah.
So I kind of want to see how much I can trash it.
There you go.
So I guess I don't count that one.
Yep.
In this, because I'm hitting it with a screwdriver.
Yeah, you're literally hitting it with a screwdriver. There's nothing you can do.
But it's the cymbal repair thing has allowed me to connect with a lot of drummers and musicians in ways that I would not have otherwise. And I think that that's super valuable to be able to develop relationships with a lot of people.
Yep.
Through that. And, through booking Happy Apple or the trucking company at Lawrence, I developed a relationship with Dave, but now, just because of these instruments I've worked on, that's a whole other level where, he'll hit me up usually the day of. Every time he gets into town, I'll just, look at my phone. It's like, oh, Dave King, that's an exciting phone call to get, or text or whatever.
That's cool.
And he's like, hey, I'm in town. What are you doing this afternoon? I'm like, nothing.
He's just looking to hang.
Just looking to hang.
That's great.
There was one time he hit me up and he's like, hey, do you want to go to the Art Institute?
Yeah.
Like, yes, that's all I want to do.
Man, I've got a great Dave King story. I worked a festival with him once. I don't know if I want to tell this story, but it is fantastic. It's just,
I mean,
he's an interesting dude. Anybody that's seen him play, like, he's like a comedian on the microphone.
Yeah. So the cymbal jewelry offshoot of the cymbal repair, has been interesting in a few different ways. The first being the quality of my cymbal repair work has gone way up, because when you're working with small objects,
you got to be
you have to be very meticulous. So I figured out all these methods to make the end result, like the finishing after the repair, almost a mirror finish, and it's pristine and beautiful. I kind of pride myself on it being better than what was originally there.
Cool.
And it also connects me with the world outside of musicians, because everybody likes music.
Yep.
Or if you don't,
and that's such a cool idea.
It's
a cool idea.
It's
to be like,
and it's
jewelry
a way,
made out of
it's a way for non-musicians to
drummers
connect with music in a different way.
Totally. Do you sell them at shows?
I have.
Man. Yeah, I'm trying not to say should anymore. I've been listening to Steve Gould's podcast. Steve Gould's an amazing drummer. And he talks about the difference between saying should and could. I'm trying not to say should, but man, you could set up a box that has your jewelry in it at the merch table. I mean,
I have done that. The first time I sold jewelry kind of publicly out in the world was in the lobby of the Fly Honey show in 2019.
Cool.
They just had vendors set up things. So there was a person who made like leather harnesses.
Yeah.
Who was providing them for people in the show if they wanted to wear them, and then people attending the show could also buy them.
Cool.
And that was a really great way to promote her business.
Right.
And so, she had been very established, but I knew that she was going to be there selling stuff. And so I just hit up the production manager of the show and asked if I could, set up a table. And she said, "Oh yeah, we have lots more vendors, out there this year.
Cool.
We would love to have you." And I don't know if I paid a commission or anything to just set up out there.
Just did it.
And I just did it, and I sold out.
That's awesome. I think as musicians, it's like Abhorrent and Expanse did cassettes.
Yeah.
Right? It's like we're thinking about merch-wise, like how can we do things that are not CDs? I mean, it's like basically how can we do things that are not CDs? We all have CDs. I have boxes and boxes of them, thousands of CDs in my shed at my house. And for a while we were selling them like a lot. And then it was like 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012. And it was like no more CDs, 2013, 2014, just going down, 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 down. So the idea that you could sell cassettes as like a nostalgic thing, people that are like my age and up, it's like, hey, we grew up listening to cassettes. And something like jewelry, Jana's band my wife's band has these gift cards that are like these beautifully designed gift cards by her dad that then have a download card inside so they can download the album and then also have a gift card they can give away, or like she'll do like packs of 5, and they're in nice plastic covers so that you can have this nice gift card to give out to somebody.
I bought an art print at a show.
Yeah.
Because I try to support all the artists that I listen to in some way. So, even if I know that I'm going to go stream the album, I do try to actually buy most of the albums that I really
I think fans want to support.
If I'm just going to stream, I'm going to buy a shirt.
Yeah. I got that same shirt. Shirt Andrew's wearing. I got that same
Shout out My Tree.
That's My Tree. My Tree. Caroline Davis's band. Really amazing group. Both bought T-shirts at their show. We played with them in Madison on Sunday. Yeah.
And, I bought an art print from this kind of, I guess, new pop. So I don't know. They had dancers on stage. It was kind of rad that they were touring with dancers. I don't remember the name of the band, but I have the print framed in my bedroom. And I just think about that thing. It was like a very simple thing, but I liked it.
Something that Luke did at our show. It's like, he didn't talk to us about this, but he brought in somebody to sell a bunch of like weed products. It was like this like, hey, this is legal in Chicago now, and here you go. I think that's such an interesting aspect too. Is like you could bring in vendors, like you were talking about is that a burlesque show that you were talking about?
Yeah.
It's like having vendors that sell other things that aren't music related.
And
then maybe working out some kind of commission.
Vendor at that show as well.
Yeah, and that's fascinating to me too. That's definitely an interesting avenue musicians can take. I want to talk for a second about social media because neither of you are active very much. Brian, you're like completely MIA on social media. Nothing, he says. Nothing. So
hashtag Brian Courage.
Hashtag Brian Courage.
God damn.
We're adding hashtags of Brian. I always love. So we talk on the podcast. We talk a lot to people who like build social followings and like how do you build your numbers on TikTok or like why do TikTok. And I think there's a lot of good arguments for like doing that depending on who you are and what your interests are. But there are so many artists that make a career apart from that whole scene. And I mean, Brian, like you're somebody who's done it, you're a full-time player. You've got a house in Chicago. I mean, it's like, obviously you're like doing it. You're doing it. And you've never been on social media. I mean, it's like, I think that's so rad. And obviously it was intentional. Like, what do you think about, do you have thoughts about this whole thing? Like, let's berate our listeners a little bit. Like, why shouldn't they do it? Nothing.
Facebook became really popular initially around 2007, which was as I was graduating from high school. And I had a bunch of friends in high school who, as we're all graduating, say, oh, you have to get on Facebook. It's the only way we're going to be able to stay in touch. And I thought to myself, if I went to school with this person for 4 years or longer and never got their phone number or email address, then chances are I probably don't want to talk to them anyway. So that was my logic. And then I got to Lawrence, and within the first month of being there, immediately lost my cell phone and lost contact with everybody much more abruptly than I had anticipated. So I was cut off from all of those people very quickly. But yeah, once I got to Minneapolis and started working professionally, started gigging a lot, I just realized that the most important things I could do as someone without social media was to show up to as many of other local people's gigs as possible. Go out to hear other local musicians at every opportunity. And I quickly became known as the guy who was at everybody else's gigs.
Totally.
Like Max Santiago still introduces me to people as that guy. He's an amazing drummer in Minnesota who runs a local venue called Jazz Central. So that was a big part for me, is just go. I mean, I wanted to anyway. I was in a new city. I wanted to hear as much of the local music as possible. So I was just doing something I already wanted to do and reaping the professional benefits of doing that.
Yep.
So that was one part. And then the other part was just answer your phone when people call you. Like, and by that, I mean actually pick up the phone and receive phone calls, not just respond quickly to a text. Like,
right.
If you get a call, robocalls were maybe a little bit less common at that point, but if you get a call with an area code that you recognize as being local to the scene you're in, but a number that you don't have, pick it up.
Yeah.
Because worst case, you've wasted 30 seconds with a wrong number or a telemarketer or somebody.
Yeah.
Best case,
Which you can
you've
just hang
got a
up on.
gig you didn't have earlier that day.
Right.
So, end of 2013, I started working a lot at the Artist Quarter in St. Paul. Billy Peterson, the incredible bass player who's in his 50s, 60s at that point, who just played all over the world, amazingly accomplished player. But he was traveling a lot, and sometimes for extended periods. And Kenny Horst, the owner of the club, didn't necessarily know when Billy was going to be back. Like, it was usually they were the house rhythm section for a lot of local artists as well as touring artists that were coming through.
Right.
And so Billy would go on these trips, and Kenny didn't always have a backup plan. And I met Kenny the first night I was in Minneapolis. I came to hear Adam play with the Graydon Peterson Quartet.
Oh, cool.
At the Artist Quarter. And I don't think Kenny really, like, I met him briefly, but he didn't know who I was for a while. But I sat in on some other gigs at the AQ later on. And then he started calling me to come down, especially for weeknight stuff. They usually had their weekend bands booked, but there were a lot of Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday gigs with Peter Shimke and Chris Lomheim and Dave Carr and all these guys who were just integral local parts of the scene, who were playing there once or twice a month. And the expectation was that Billy and Kenny were your rhythm section on those gigs. And then Billy would be gone for 2 months, and Kenny needed to fill these dates. And a lot of times it was just the day of. It's like, and I was just like, Kenny calls, he told me so many times, it's like, man, I just love the fact that you pick up the phone when I call you. That it's not, I'm leaving you, that I'm not leaving you a voicemail on a Tuesday for a Tuesday night gig. And then you call me back on Friday. It's like, oh, well, I don't have anything for you. This is gone already. But like for the last 6 months the club was open, I was working there 3 or 4 nights a week.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, then I did some of the weekend stuff too. I did a weekend with Lou Tabakin.
Cool.
I did a weekend with David Hazeltine. Like, had some other artists that were coming through that I never played with Lou in New York when I was living there.
Yep.
I was just one of 500 bass players that he could call to do something. But he comes to Minnesota, I'm the dude.
Yeah.
And I'm the dude
that's
because
cool.
I picked up my phone.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Kenny always, I mean, half jokingly, but he always told anyone who would listen that they had a bed for me in the green room because of how much I was working at the club, that I just lived at the AQ. And I am, forever grateful to him and the whole staff of the AQ for that opportunity, because I don't know if I could have done that anywhere else.
Yeah, that's great. I feel like a lot of people, I don't know, for me personally, you were the only person I talked on the phone with for a long time.
Yeah.
I was like, nobody would call. I wouldn't call anyone. Nobody would call. And now, like, years have gone by, and maybe there's fatigue from like the emptiness of social media, where it's like I just had my birthday and there were like a billion people commented on my, it's like one person texted me to say happy birthday. You know what I mean? And nobody called, or like my family called. But it's like, it's interesting. It's like, it's so impersonal. It's not real. It doesn't feel like real interaction. And so lately in the last, especially since I moved to the UP, the last couple of years, I've been more proactive about like, I want to call my friends and talk to them. I'm going to call Evan Montgomery in LA, and I'm going to call, it's like, I'm going to call Ben in Denver, and I'm going to, it's like my buddies who have now moved everywhere, Corey in Seattle. It's like, I'm going to call my friends and talk to them. And sometimes they answer and sometimes they don't. Yep. It's like people don't answer the phone. I'll call Andrew Foreman sometimes. I know he's always out somewhere. But man, it's, I have now come to really cherish that, being able to talk on the phone with someone. And I try to answer my phone more. I don't always do it, but I try to answer my phone more, for sure.
I think that's something that kind of generationally happens. I'm a millennial, and I think we all are.
I am as well. Yes.
And our generation, because we grew up where dial-up internet was just happening and we were like little kids. I remember my first computer interaction was at school in kindergarten with a green screen, like MS-DOS situation. And, perforated things on the side of the printer paper.
Oh, yeah.
And the full-size floppy disk that was actually floppy, not the plastic one.
Yep.
And because we saw the rise of technology and experienced all of that, now suddenly we're in middle school and AOL Instant Messenger is the best thing in the world. And I feel like that's where our generation went. We're just sticking with that. That's the way to do it. And so like text messaging wasn't like that for so long because it was on a numpad.
Yeah, you had it 3 times to get L.
Yeah. And then, the smart thing got it, and like suddenly it started getting a little bit better. And then, Blackberries are like full keyboard.
My dad owned a cell phone store. He goes, no one in the United States is ever going to text, because that's a thing for Japan that happens. China, they're doing that, but no one's ever going to do that in the United States.
And as soon as the unlimited text message
Dad, you're wrong.
plans came out.
As soon as they weren't each 10 cents per message.
Yeah.
Right. Then suddenly it was like, oh, we're never going back.
Yeah.
And I've talked to so many people who are like, yeah, don't call me. Don't do it.
Yeah.
And outside of the music world, there's
all kinds of internet memes like
thing.
that.
Right.
That are like, somebody's calling. What? I'm hiding.
And I can confirm, like, Brian is one of the few people, like, infamously will just like start talking and then be on the phone for 3 or 4 hours because it's kind of like we're just hanging out, and he doesn't live that far from me now. Like
we still do that.
We do
not
that.
For 3 hours
Right.
necessarily,
but we used to do that when he was far away, and now he's very close, all things considered, and we still kind of do that.
Yeah. Sometimes it's easier to hang out without actually driving over to somebody's house. We'll just be on the phone for an hour instead. It's like we both want to still be close to each other, but it's like, I'm kind of tired. I don't want to leave the house right now. It's like,
Yeah.
And the idea that, you know, the way to approach a phone call now is you text someone, hey, can you chat for a second?
Right.
And
I've definitely done that.
And then, you know, you get consent for the phone call. And
consent for the phone call.
That's wild.
Coming from, it's like, as millennials, it's like
FaceTime is 100% necessary.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. A random FaceTime. Come on, man. Come on.
There are 5 people that I'll accept a random FaceTime from.
There are some people. I mean, it's like we were just talking about the other day. There's some people, like, if they FaceTime me, Andrew Stoll will FaceTime me just out of the blue. Like, he's like maybe the only one. But man, we're tight, man. Andrew and I are
exactly. It's got to be
even if we don't talk
friend.
for a long time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just different with him.
But yeah, so the desire for the minimum amount of acceptable contact.
Yeah. What's that doing to us? What's that doing to us as humans?
Well, all those happy birthday messages on your Facebook wall.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I just went through that in April, and I looked, you know, and they still feel good. You're still like, oh, you're checking in with that person, but it's the bare minimum amount of social interaction.
A lot of times I'll actually say, I'll say something. Mm-hmm. Be like, hey, you know, how's it going? What are the kids like? Are we going to see each other at the 20-year reunion? I'm like, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. You going to the 20-year reunion next year? 20-year high school reunion's coming up, by the way, guys. Holy smokes. I was
just texting people about the 10-year.
Yeah. I was going to say, as millennials, like, we're some of the one of the last generations that like memorized people's phone numbers and called them, you know, like, but like I still have phone numbers memorized for my friends, or like call, like I saw some internet meme. It was like, when we were kids, we would call and we would have to talk to their parents before
there was an intermediary.
What? You know,
or their little sister would pick up the phone and they're like 9 and you're like, hey, can you put your older brother on?
Put your older brother on the phone.
And sometimes they wouldn't. They would just hang up and you call back and they pick up again and they just hang up again.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So that, you know, that's interesting to me, like how we've changed as people, and like that's got to be a negative impact on us in some way.
I think so.
In terms of our in terms of our connection with other people.
It's the idea that when you like that, there's a peak amount of people that you can know really well. Mm-hmm. If we don't have a way to connect with each other, like our phones, like if you live, let's say in a hypothetical, just, you know, completely removed from everything else, if there are 100 people in your town, you're going to know everyone.
Yeah.
And I know that there have been studies that show like there's a specific number of people that you can know really well. And I think it's around 100. But with the, you know, kind of global interconnectivity, we try to do more than that.
Or you just know so many people not that well.
Right. So it's just
like
acquaintances.
Tons,
so like how many best friends can you have?
Yeah.
How many people do you like really trust with everything? And I think in the music world, when you play in a lot of bands with people and you see people on the scene, it feels like you have so many friends. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying you don't, but the desire to kind of become close with so many people has kind of gone out the window because we have this illusion that we have so many friends.
Well, now that I've moved away from Minneapolis, it's interesting because I played with a lot of people regularly in Minneapolis, and now when I come back, if I come visit or whatever, I'll be like, hey, I'm coming to town. Can we hang? It's like, no, sorry, we can't. You know, it's like, oh, okay. So we weren't friends. Like we toured a whole bunch together. It felt like we were friends. We know each other really well because of all the touring, but it's like, there isn't that like, yes, I'll make time for you, you know, and there are some friends, and a lot of them, for me, are the people that aren't musicians. That the people that are musicians, but aren't like full-time pros. They have other jobs. Those are the people that I can call and go, do you want to go to the Twins game? And they'll be like, yeah, let's do that. You know, and maybe that's partly because like being a musician is just fecking hard, and like it's hard to be like, yeah, I'm going to peace out for a few hours. It's like you're working on something, or you're on your way to a gig or whatever, but it's a grind.
There's also a different kind of relationship that you can have with other people that I kind of like just thought of. So I'll pose this question. Did you guys go to summer camp when you were growing up?
I went to Blue Lake Fine Arts Camp every summer for 7 years. Yes.
I did not know we were mortal enemies.
Band camp, baby. That's why I don't like
I went to
interlocking people.
interlocking.
I know, man. That's why I don't like interlocking.
Woo!
Actually,
And
the drummer who
truth
played
comes
was
out.
in Europe when I toured Europe with the band from Blue Lake. The drummer from that band was an interlocking cat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, did you have camp friends where you'd see them every year and you wouldn't talk at all during the school year, and then you'd go back to camp and you're immediately best friends again?
Yeah. Situational.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's completely possible to have situational friends, and I think that's kind of what you're describing.
Yeah,
with,
sure.
With
Totally.
touring friends or with
Yeah.
people you get to know in a city, or it's coworkers. It's that type of friendship where you get along with someone really well, but you don't necessarily seek out things outside of that.
Yeah. And when I was in that scene, we weren't hanging out really.
Right.
Like maybe we would, after a gig, maybe we'd go get a beer or something, but like we weren't really like on off nights hanging out.
Mm-hmm.
But so yeah, I get it. I mean, I get it.
But yeah, so I guess the way to do it without social media, I mean, I'm definitely on social media and Facebook and Instagram more now, I guess, than I was. But
You're not like trying to build your business there.
no,
Yeah.
I'm not. And the number of people who tell me I should is endless.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to receive advice, you know, and a lot of the ideas are very good, but I also only have so much time.
Yeah.
And only have so much time that I want to devote to that thing,
Right.
because it's every moment that I devote to something is a sacrifice from something else. So, you know, it's a challenge because
Yeah.
we're all spread too thin because we say yes to too many things.
Yeah. That's definitely a thing. And speaking of time, I think we've been talking for a long time.
Yeah, I think so too.
Woo! Talking for a long time. We're doing good. Hour and 20 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Might have to split this up into 2 episodes. I think that's good. I think we've covered all the stuff. So thank you for watching on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, hit like, add a comment, you know, ask me the kind of stuff you want me to talk about. If this is something you want to learn about, something you want to talk about on the podcast, say it in the comment section. If you're watching on, or if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, give us a 5-star review. If you really dig it, you can write a little review. That helps it show up in other people's feeds. And that's it. That's it. We have an app. GigBoss is an app. It's an organizational tool for freelance musicians. You can create groups. You can create events. You can track all the details to events. Eventually, you're going to be able to do a lot more stuff, and we're building stuff. So download it. There's a link in the description. I'm not going to put any bumper talking on this episode. We're just going to leave it like it is. So thanks for listening. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Brian, for being on the show and talking about your expertise, giving us your expertise. I appreciate it very much.
So-called expertise.
So-called expertise. We're all in it, man. We're in it, and we're learning as we go. And you guys have amazing experiences, and I'm sure that's going to be incredibly valuable. It's a lot of great nuggets.
Well, thanks for having us.
Yeah.
And hashtag Brian Courage.
Nothing. Hashtag Brian Courage. All right. That's it. Boom. We did it.
Woo! Take a walk out.